Hey guys, welcome back to another YouTube video. And today's video, guys, it is officially time for the grand finale of the year, even though it is technically 2024. And so you know what time it is. It is time to do my tier list of all of the movies that I watched in 2023, and we have 53 movies to rank. And there are there are 3 on here actually that are technically releases from last year, but I didn't get the chance to see them until this year, and I didn't really talk about them much anyway, so I really wanted to talk about them, so I threw them on here. So it's just going to be the first few, and then the rest will all be 2023 releases, and so I hope that clears up any confusion at the start of the video. But yeah, we got 53 movies to do, and so if you don't want to watch this whole list because it's going to be a long one, I will have timestamps throughout the video for every single movie on this list, so if there's a particular movie that you want to see my take on, you will be able to go through and see every single one here. And so yeah, this is what we've been building up to for the entire year, and I'm really excited to get into this. And I guess before we do, make sure that you have watched my other end of the year rankings before checking this one out, any of my recent reviews, anything like that. And after this, stay tuned for 2024 movie reviews, and it's going to be a bit of a slower month, but it'll build up once, you know, the summer hits and all that kind of stuff. But for right now, just enjoy the ranking. We have 6 tiers. I believe last time I just did the traditional S, A, B, C, D, but here I included B+, because I feel like there's enough of them on this list that I would put in that category of B+, where I don't think it's necessarily a high-quality film, but I probably enjoyed it quite a bit, and so that's what that tier is for. Otherwise, your other standard tiers on here, and so yeah, I guess let's start out with our first movie. So for my first movie on this list, and this is of course going to be in chronological order of release, and I found out recently that this movie actually came out way back in June of 2022. I thought that it came out in January of 2023 in theaters, which is when I saw it. Because it released on streaming the next month, and there was a DVD release in like summer of 2023. But no, this movie actually came out way back in June of 2022. So technically, it would be the first one on this list, and that is Skinamarink, which is certainly not a movie for everybody. This is very, very much a experimental film. This is the director's debut movie. Many people many of the reviews that I've seen, people found this to be one of the most unpleasant experiences of the year, which I think is unfortunate because I'm very much a big fan of this type of subgenre of horror. It kind of fits into that internet horror category, and it's basically trying to capture the a child at like midnight, or like at night, and like their kind of imagination at night, like where, you know, maybe he's like half asleep and he sees something that looks like some kind of shadowy figure in his room, but really it's just like a coat hanging up or something like that. And so this is very much an experimental film, and some people are going to find this to be very unpleasant, and some people like me, who's a big fan of this type of horror, is going to enjoy it a lot more than many others. So for me, while many people would probably put this at D tier just because of how unpleasant they felt it was, I'm going to put this at the B tier because, well, I don't think that this was the most intriguing film or like enjoyable experience throughout the year. Obviously, most of this film is just spent looking at walls and just static images around this one house. There's very little dialogue. We don't really get to see our main characters a lot. I still feel like there are some more standout moments, particularly the last 10 to 15 minutes, some of the most scariest stuff I've seen in horror, and the very, very few jump scares that this movie has, because there is just so much time building up suspense throughout this movie, work really, really, really well. And so I appreciate this movie for what it is. I like some of the sound design in here for some of the, like, there'll be something like weird that happens, and there's like this really, really interesting sound that kind of evokes that like awkward feeling that you get when you saw like that weird thing happen, I guess you want to say. And so I just really like some of the sound design that the director chose, and just the way he was able to really capture a child's imagination in this movie. And so that's why I'm really into this type of horror, because a lot of it has to do with like dreams and like your childhood and nostalgia and that kind of stuff. And so I appreciate what this movie did. It's a very experimental film, and I hope that with this director's success, because this was, if you watch my biggest box office successes and failures of the year, this was on here because this had probably the lowest budget out of all the movies on here, with like a $10,000 to $15,000 budget, and made over $2 million. So the director, for his debut, even though he didn't get the best ratings, he definitely found financial success, and so I hope he is able to use that to improve his later films and make these types of experimental films in that kind of niche horror subgenre more appealing in the future. So Skinamarink, I'm going to put it in the B tier. Next up on this list, yet again another 2022 release, but I didn't see it until this year, or I guess now would be last year. You know what I mean. But there was a re-release in 2023 for this movie with a trailer for Terrifier 3 at the end, and I had never got the chance to see Terrifier 2. I was planning to see it in 2022, but I was going through surgery and whatnot at the time. And yeah, so I finally got to see it this year, and I really, really, really enjoyed Terrifier 2. Enough to, I would say, put it up in probably the A tier. I really, really had a freaking good time with Terrifier 2. I'm somebody who had just got familiar with the Terrifier franchise very, very recently with movies like All Hallows Eve and the first Terrifier film. And so I kind of got the gist of what it's all about. You got Art the Clown, who's this very eccentric character that we still don't really know a whole lot about, so hopefully we will learn more about him in Terrifier 3. But, you know, Terrifier franchise really focuses on kind of just outdoing itself with the blood and gore. And if you think, like, franchises like Saw are bad, this movie, like, Terrifier franchise takes it to a whole nother level with just some of the absolute brutal, gruesome kills that it has in there. But I really enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed some of our actors in here, of course. David Howard Thornton does a great job as Art the Clown. Our final girl, which I forget the actor's name, or actress's name, I think she does a really, really great job in here. She was getting a lot of praise in this movie. I think that the mom does a pretty fine job, and as well, also the brother, who's supposed to be coming back in Terrifier 3, I think did a good job, and he's a fairly young actor as well. So, Terrifier 2, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I would say the only minor complaint that I have is I think it is a little bit too long. No horror movie, in my opinion, should be anywhere over 2 hours. Most horror movies should be like hour and a half, hour 45 minutes max. But Terrifier 2 really pushes the limit with its runtime. But I think just because it is so enjoyable, it ends up not being too big of an issue for me. So I really enjoyed Terrifier 2, and yeah, goes in the A tier for me. For the last 2022 release that I threw in here because I didn't get the chance to talk about it, I got Puss in Boots, which I'm going to put in, I was thinking about the A tier, but I am going to put it in B+. I really enjoyed this movie, but I don't think it was enough to put it in the A tier. I was not a big fan of the first Puss in Boots movie. I thought it was very, very boring, and so I didn't really have any plans to see it in 2022, but eventually a few of my friends wanted to do a little meetup and watch a movie, and so we decided to go see Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and I really enjoyed this movie. I had a really fun time with it. I think it's a very pleasant, charming film. I like our main, I like Puss in here, and I like the kind of the whole concept of not taking things for granted with the fact that he has 9 lives, and he finally realizes, like, oh crap, I'm on my last life. I need to, I need to be more careful. So I kind of like the overall theme of it. I think this is a very pleasant, charming film, and it worked really, really well for me, so it goes in B+. Next up, we have Megan, which was, if you watched my biggest surprises and disappointments video, this was one of the bigger surprises of the year for me because it had a lot more to offer than I initially expected. And Megan, I'm stuck in between the A tier and B+, but I think I'm going to stick it in the B+ tier. This is a very, very solid film. Like I said, had a lot more to offer than I initially expected. When I saw the trailer for this movie, I just thought this was absolutely ridiculous. Even more ridiculous than when I seen, like, the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey trailer for the first time. And so I just was not really sold on this movie at all. I thought that at best it was going to be this corny film about this creepy AI doll, and that's going to be about the extent of it. But it actually tackled some very, very relevant issues, or very, very relevant I guess not, would you say issues, very, very relevant topics of today with the emergence of AI and how it's going to affect like many, many different things, particularly and tackled in this movie, education and parenting and whatnot. And that was something that I was really not expecting for it to offer. And because it's so relevant, this movie just made a very, very big impact on me, being the first movie that I watched in 2023. And so I really enjoyed Megan. You know, beyond the wacky AI creepy doll, there is a very much an underlying theme that, you know, left an impact. And I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that this movie was better than I expected, because it does have James Wan. I believe he's one of the producers or co-directors of this movie, and he's just an incredible, not just horror director, but just an incredible director in general, obviously. And I watched some interviews of the main director in this for this movie, and got to see some of his input on kind of the overall theme of this movie, and I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, Megan, one of the bigger surprises of the year, and I'm gonna land it in B+. Next up, we have Missing, which was another one of the bigger surprises of the year for me, and probably one of the best experiences of 2023 for me. So I'm actually gonna shoot this one all the way up to the A tier, above Terrifier 2. This movie is kind of like sort of a spin-off of this movie called Searching that came out a few years prior, and I have never watched that movie, but the concept of this movie sounded interesting enough, and I heard good enough things about this movie to go check it out, and so I seen it with a few family members in a packed theater. This theater was really, really packed. And I just had a really, really great time with Missing. This is sort of like a mystery thriller, but I threw it in my horror ranking, which I don't know if you really want to consider it a horror movie that much, but yeah, this was sort of like a mystery thriller type of movie, and this definitely lived up to being a thriller. This was a edge of your seat movie throughout the entire runtime, and I think that the format really helped with that. This is one of my favorite movies, probably in this little subgenre of horror where it takes place on somebody's like computer, and you're like scrolling through the internet or different things, and the only times that you would see them is if they're got their webcam open or something like that. And the reason why that works so well in Missing is because this is a mystery type thriller, you're able to kind of look at smaller details throughout like her laptop and whatnot, and really try to like find, you know, all these like different Easter eggs and whatnot, and you learn at the same pace as our main character does. And so it really just helps you be engaged in the experience and kind of be in this and put yourselves into the shoes of the main character and kind of understand their situation, because you're learning stuff at the same pace as our main character here. And so I think that I just really enjoyed this movie. Probably one of the best experiences of the year for me. I haven't really seen any movies with Stormy Reed in it, but I think she did a pretty good job. The mom as well did a pretty good job, and yeah, just the story just kept me on the edge of the seat the entire time. A lot of twists and turns throughout it. Some predictable, some not so predictable, and so it was a very, very fun experience overall. Next up, we have Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and in some regards, I want to put Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey like right here, but I understand that this is not a good quality film whatsoever, and so I gotta put Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey down in the D tier. Now, experience-wise, not so bad. I actually saw this in probably the best atmosphere that you could see it in. I saw it with a few family members, a few friends, and we all had a fairly good time. Even though this movie was definitely terrible, we were all laughing and having a fun time with how terrible this movie was. And I, like, when I saw the trailer, I saw a lot of, like, trailer reactions for this movie the year prior, and I thought there is no way that this is an actual movie that's going to be coming out. Like, I thought this was some kind of spoof or parody or some kind of joke, but there's no way this movie's coming out. And then I found out, you know, very, very close to this movie's release date, I was like, oh yeah, that movie. And then I saw that it was playing in my local theater, and I could not believe it. And so I was like, I need to go check this out. And yes, this is objectively a very, very bad movie. The worst movie of the year, probably, in terms of just the acting, the costume designs are very, very cheap. Half of the gore in this film and like kills are like off screen, so that doesn't really help very much. So yes, this is a very, very terribly made film, and definitely a cash grab, I would say. The directors kind of were able to get the license through kind of a bunch of technicalities and whatnot, because Winnie the Pooh, I guess, got into public domain, and so they were able to make this movie and get a bit of a cash grab out of it and charge ridiculous ticket prices for this. I believe some people were saying in some places it was like $20 per ticket. And I had no idea that this was going to be a British-made film. That didn't throw anything off. That didn't, bring anything down for me. That was one of the things that kind of surprised me about it. But yeah, this is objectively probably the most terrible movie in terms of quality this year. But it wasn't the most boring film for me. I still did get a little bit of a kick out of it. Some of the kills were all right, but yeah, the acting was terrible. Costume design's pretty cheap. But will I probably see the sequel to this movie? Probably, yeah. Just because, like I said, I've seen it with a bunch of friends. I've seen it with family members. We're probably going to watch the second one just to laugh at how terrible that one probably will be as well. But with all the backlash that this movie has gotten, maybe that's not going to happen. I have no idea. I haven't looked at the release date for the second movie. But what I will say about Winnie the Pooh is, I'm not saying that this is a great movie by any means. This is a very, very bad movie. But I just do not understand some of the frustration that some people have over this film, where the directors are scam artists, and they deserve all the hate they get because they were stealing monies out of their, like, how do I want to put this? I guess people are essentially saying, I want my money back after watching this movie. And what I'll say to that is, tell me with a straight face that when you saw the trailer for this movie the first time, you actually thought that this was going to be a good movie. Like, and even if you didn't think it was a good movie, maybe you thought, like, kind of in where you're in my boat, where, okay, well, this is probably like some B-movie cheese. Like, it'll probably be a fun, bad type of movie. I'm sure that's what most people were thinking, but it just doesn't seem like the way that people are frustrated with this movie, it doesn't seem like it was that way. It seems like people watched this trailer and they were actually thinking like, hey, this could actually be a pretty good film. And you cannot tell me with a straight face that was what you thought. Like, I knew when I saw the trailer for this movie, this looked like a parody. And when I watched this movie, that's exactly what it was. It just felt like a spoof type of movie. It was really, really, really badly acted, cheap costume designs, all that kind of stuff that you'd see out of a spoof. And so it just amazes me that people are so frustrated with this film and essentially like, I want my money back. And I'm just like, you can't tell me that you actually thought this was going to be a good movie. And you're the one who decided, if you are one of those people who are like, oh, they charged me this much for tickets, you're the one who decided to pay for the tickets. So, and movie tickets already are pretty ridiculous. Most movie tickets, at least where I am at, are about $12, some close to $15. So, I don't know. You're the one who decided to buy it. You could have maybe watched this on streaming. I don't know if they did release it on streaming. Knowing the directors, they probably weren't so kind about that and probably wanted to get as much money as they could. But, despite all the backlash, and despite how terrible this movie is, if there is ever a sequel, I'll probably go see it just for fun. Just for shits and giggles, basically. But yeah, I just don't understand some of the frustration over it, but it's obviously a very, very terrible movie. Next up, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which I feel like has gotten a lot of slack this year, but I think it was still a fairly solid film. I'll put it in the B tier, probably above Skinamarink, but obviously, I think each of the tiers you could mix and match a little bit. This isn't a direct ranking because that would be very hard to do. But Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, for a while, throughout the year, this movie kind of lowered down my rankings quite a bit. But, I come back to realize, and I still did have a fairly good time with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I don't like how it kind of turns into it turns into, like, every other MCU movie. And the thing that I always liked about the Ant-Man movies is that they were a lot smaller scale. They were just kind of more of a campy they had more of a campy feeling to it. And Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania being the first movie of Phase 5, having Kang as your main villain, makes it seem like a much larger scale movie, and like it's trying to set up a lot of other movies. And I just don't like Ant-Man movies to be that. So I think that this movie could have been in a much better spot had Kang not been the choice for the main villain, and just mix match a few different things, and I think this movie would be in a much better spot. Obviously, I actually I got really excited for Kang after this movie. It seemed like the MCU was finally getting into a clear direction, but I don't like how he was defeated by Ant-Man. So I like the villain of Kang. It got me excited for it. It felt like we were finally heading towards somewhere, but at the same time, Ant-Man or Kang was defeated by Ant-Man, and that just kind of decreases his threat level, despite the fact that there are thousands of Kangs out there who want to like control the multiverse or whatever. But now obviously Jonathan Majors has been completely removed from the MCU picture, so who even knows? Yeah, it just seems like a lot of people are hyping up this movie. This is the kickoff to Phase 5, and maybe this is where the MCU is really going to start heading in a better direction, and it just doesn't seem like this movie really accomplished that. It still feels like we don't know where we're going after Endgame, especially with Jonathan Majors being charged and not being able to come back to the MCU. So, I don't know. I still enjoyed Quantumania. I just wish it was, like the other Ant-Man films, a little bit more smaller scale. So, I'll still throw it in the B tier. Next up, we have Cocaine Bear, and this is probably... I can't believe that this movie came out in 2023. It feels like it's been forever since I've talked about this movie. I'll put Cocaine Bear in the B tier, above Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I'd say it got a better time out of it than that movie, but it feels like with Cocaine Bear, obviously a very ridiculous concept. It feels like they spent a little bit more time on actual plot than they needed to with a movie concept like this, but I still got a kick out of it. It's very, very loosely based off of a true story from the 80s, so this movie takes place during the 80s, and it definitely does have quite a bit of 80s vibes to it, and I had a really fun time with the concept. I thought it was a fun movie overall. I liked, I believe, O'Shea Jackson Jr., Ice Cube's son. I really liked him in here. He's probably my favorite. But, so yeah, Cocaine Bear, I got a kick out of it. You would wish that there was, less time spent on actual plot and just having more fun with the crazy Cocaine Bear stuff than like actually focusing on the plot itself. But it goes in the B tier for me. Next up, you have Scream 6, a movie that has definitely fell off from glory since the first time that I watched it. I definitely had a lot of recency bias for this movie the first time I've seen it, and have realized a lot of the flaws that this movie contains. But I still had a really good time with Scream 6. I would still put it in the B tier, probably above Cocaine Bear. I still really enjoyed this movie. I think Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera officially proved that like they were able to really take over and be the new faces of the Scream franchise, and it sucks now that that's not the case anymore. So we're not going to get that anymore, sadly. But you have to take this movie for what it was at the time, and they just did an outstanding job as being the main leads in this film, and proved that we don't need Neve Campbell or even Courtney Cox, who's still in this movie for a few bits, and the few bits that she was, I think she did I really enjoyed it. But it just proved that we don't need them to keep coming back to the franchise so that we have somebody to lean on. We have a new cast, we trust them, and they do a very, very great job. I like the core four here, all of them, I really do enjoy. I like Kirby coming back from Scream 4, I liked her role in here. I do not like the Scream villains too much. I thought they were kind of just a little, how do you want to say? I just found them very, very annoying, I guess, or I can't think of the word for it right now, but I just wasn't a big fan of the villains in here. I predicted a few of them very, very early on. The third one, though, although I wasn't able to predict, I was just like, when they revealed the third villain, I was just like, really? That POS is one of them. But Scream 6, I still had a really fun time with it. I think there's a lot of there's way too much leeway with how some characters were able to survive. There's like characters get survived like 50 million times in here, and they come back later or whatever. Like, is our main guy in the core 4, who's basically the new Dewey at this point. He somehow survives at the end of the movie after being stabbed by 2 Ghostface like 20 times each, and he's like, core 4, baby, and I'm like, yeah, BS. But and then even one of the like Scream or one of the Ghostfaces ends up surviving a miraculous amount, or miraculously, after like a bunch of stabs and shots or whatnot. But either way, I still really enjoyed this movie, but it has definitely fell off. Had I made this ranking right after I watched this movie, it probably would have been up in the A tier, but now I realize that it's definitely not as good as I initially thought going out of it. But I think that just proves that I had a really, really fun time with it, and walking out of it, I really, really enjoyed Scream 6. Then we have 65, which has been at the bottom of many people's lists. There was a lot of anticipation for it, like, oh, Adam Driver, dinosaurs, sci-fi, count me in. And I guess it wasn't as disappointing for me because I saw a lot of reviews. I didn't see this movie until like a month after it was released in theaters. And so I had already knew that like this wasn't going to be as great as many people had anticipated. And so, for me, I'd put 65 in the C tier. I think it's a good enough sci-fi film. I wasn't really coming in for the dinosaur. I mean, I guess that's where most of the action comes from, but I thought it was a good enough sci-fi film. I definitely could have been a lot better. Obviously, Adam Driver is able to do a lot more, but significantly hindered here with, like, the language barrier and the girl from the other planet. They don't speak the same language, so there's not really a whole lot of dialogue or any, like, a lot of interaction really going on, and there's just not a lot of dinosaur action, so there definitely could have been a lot more sci-fi action in here, but most of the movie is just kind of point A to point B, not really a whole lot of exciting stuff going on, but I thought it was good enough. I didn't find this movie to be very boring like maybe some other people had, surprisingly. But definitely had a lot more potential. Next up, we got Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. This is a movie that has really fell off for me, and I think it's really just maybe the atmosphere that I was watching. I was really tired. I think I was really tired when I was watching this movie, and just didn't enjoy it as maybe some other people were able to. And so, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, I'll put this at the top of the C tier. If I could add another tier, I'd put it in, like, the B-. I still enjoyed this movie somewhat. I'm not a huge D&D fan, but I guess I was expecting a little bit more. There was a lot of early buzz for this movie with some of the early access screenings that were going on, and I'm sure many of those people were probably big D&D fans watching it with other D&D players, and so they were bound to have a really, really great time. For me, though, I'm not a D&D fan, and although I watched this in a fairly packed theater, I still didn't find it all that enjoyable, I guess. A few prominent actors in here that I'm familiar with and that I did like, but other than that, Dungeons & Dragons, it's alright for me. Next up, we got the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm going to put it up in at B+. I will put it... Did I enjoy it more than Megan? I mean, I suppose so, but I mean... It's easy to see. It's Super Mario. Like, how could you not enjoy him? I really enjoyed this movie. I really got a kick out of it. There's not really a whole lot of bad things to say about it. It's able to appeal to a very large audience. To any kid can enjoy the Mario Bros, obviously, and even adults, the parents of the kids in particular, they probably played the Super Mario Bros games when they were a kid, so they can enjoy it too. And so this is just a fun, family-friendly movie for everybody that everybody can enjoy. I think, it's got a perfectly fine runtime, not too long, not too short, anything like that. Obviously you have Bowser, very, very simple motivation in this movie. You got Peach, the kind of sort of love interest that's in the middle of this whole conflict between Mario and Bowser. So all of it is just set out really greatly. Obviously, some of the songs got really, really popular this year, particularly the Peaches song. And so, yeah, Super Mario Bros. Movie. I mean, how could you dislike this movie? It's very, very fun. I like the kind of build-up to facing Bowser, where we acquire some different characters from the Nintendo universe, like Donkey Kong and Toad and all that kind of stuff throughout the movie, and then we eventually face Bowser. And there's definitely a lot more potential for Nintendo there's obviously a lot more Super Mario villains out there that they can work with, and I think that those movies will probably be very, very successful because this movie made a crap ton of money, almost 1.4 billion. So yeah, Super Mario Bros. Very, very just fun, lighthearted movie. Next up, we got Renfield, which, if you're a Nicolas Cage fan and you're a Dracula fan, you're gonna like this movie. It's as simple as that. So it goes in the B+ category. I'll probably put it above Puss in Boots. I really liked Renfield. I like the gore. I like Nicholas Colt, our main lead actor in here. There was like the underlying theme. There was a little bit of commentary thrown in here too, which I wasn't expecting, but that was kind of like an unexpected bonus. I didn't even need that, but it was kind of nice to have actually a lesson behind it, and not just fruitless carnage throughout the entire movie. But even if that was the case, I still would have probably had it in the same spot. But that that kind of stuff is always welcome. And so yeah, Renfield. It's the type of movie where we didn't know that we needed it, but everybody how do you want to say it? We didn't know that, it's kind of like the hero we didn't need, or the hero we didn't know we needed, but everybody wanted. That, I don't know what, I'm losing my mind here, but I'm pretty sure you can see where I'm going with this. But yeah, if you like Nicolas Cage, which I'm a big Nicolas Cage fan, and you like Dracula, you're gonna like this movie. It's what any Nicolas Cage fan could ask for, and so I really got a kick out of this movie. Up, we got Evil Dead Rise, which is going to go up to the A tier for me. It's going to go below Terrifier 2, even though in my horror ranking, I believe I put these two movies right here below Evil Dead Rise. I think I enjoyed those movies a little bit more, but Evil Dead Rise, still a very, very great film. Very, very refreshing return to the franchise, and if you're an Evil Dead fan, gives you everything that you could ask for, honestly, plus more. It's got all kinds of blood and gore thrown in there. They whip out the chainsaw at some point at the ending of the movie. I like the atmosphere of being inside of the apartment building, where it's kind of a tight, crammed space, and because it's on one of the top floors, some of our deadites are able to use their powers to take out the stairs, and so there's not really an easy way for our characters to escape. They kind of just have to defeat the deadites. I like the character arc of I forget what her name is, but our main character, I just like her character arc and how she goes from somebody that you wouldn't really expect to be a motherly figure to becoming that motherly figure, and showing that she is able to take care of these kids that she just so happened to be babysitting in this movie. And I like her deadites in here. I like the kills, all that kind of stuff. I had a lot of fun with this movie. It is what every Evil Dead movie should be, which is groovy. So I really enjoyed it. We got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Very, very easily going to sneak up into the A tier for me. And I think it's going to go right in between Terrifier 2 and Missing. Like I said, this is in no particular order. I don't know why I always bother with where I place it here, because it's not a ranking. But I don't think that Guardians, Missing is, way above Guardians or anything like that. No, they're all fairly in a similar spot. But Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, somewhat a surprise for me, because with the MCU's recent reputation, I was very worried that this movie was going to have a lot of MCU-isms, as many people have said, and James Gunn, it turns out, was just able to use all of his creative talent and able to make his own Guardians movie. You can tell he put a lot of heart in this movie for these characters that he really, really loves, and made a very, very good conclusion to this Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. It's really amazing how far these characters who were not at all A-list superheroes, and now they are some of our favorite superheroes, are some of our favorite groups of one of our favorite groups of characters in the MCU. Of course, the soundtrack is fairly good. Not the best soundtrack. There's some songs in there that are thrown into every 80s movie, it feels like, but soundtrack as usual, fairly good. Obviously the story very, very good as well. I was not expecting them to bring Rocket or to do a full, complete character arc, or complete the character arc of Rocket in this particular way, where we show his very, very dark backstory, and then eventually he becomes the leader of Guardians of the Galaxy, and Star-Lord moves on. I wasn't expecting any of that. Like I said, I'm not very I was never very familiar with these characters, and so that was a big surprise for me. And obviously, the villain, he very, very much makes you hate this villain in this movie. And I didn't think it was over the top. I think it worked really well. And it was obviously very, very sad and tragic to watch some of our beloved animal characters in here just get shamelessly killed in this movie. There's a lot of animal cruelty, obviously, which I don't fare too well with, and I know a lot of other people don't either. And so, yeah, they were able to make you hate this villain a hell of a lot. And yeah, I really like Guardians of the Galaxy. It was just a quintessential conclusion to a trilogy where you're closing off a bunch of character arcs, everybody's kind of going their separate ways, and everything just feels like it's settled into the right spot. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I could honestly see why some people would put this as one of their top movies of the year, if not their #1 movie of the year. We got Fast X, and I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I expected. It seems like the Fast and Furious movies have been getting quite carried away in recent years, and this movie dials it back a little bit, although Jason Momoa definitely doesn't. And I really liked Fast X. I'm going to put it in the B+ tier. I'll put it right in between, like, Renfield and Puss in Boots, but generally right around there. Like I said, it dials back on some of the over-the-top stuff from our past few Fast and Furious sequels. And really, the main over-the-top thing in here is Jason Momoa, which I really do enjoy. I really enjoy him in this movie. I like him as the villain. I'm excited to see more of him in Fast 11 whenever that movie comes out. And so, yeah, I really liked Fast X. Still obviously has a lot of over-the-top, nonsensical action from the past few, but like I said, dialed back a little bit. There's a few more races in here. And yeah, I just really enjoyed Fast X. I haven't talked about it a whole lot throughout the year, and I've kind of forgotten a few things about it, but overall, really enjoyed it. I like John Cena's return. I like everybody's return in here. I think they all do a fairly good job. Obviously, this movie, it seems like in every Fast and the Furious movie, as it progresses, there's more and more, like, separate. There's so many moving parts in this movie going on because our family is so big, and I get that that's a huge aspect of the Fast and Furious movies, but I don't know. It seems like they handle them okay, I feel like, but there's just so many moving parts, and so it's a lot to work with. And, you know, obviously, there's some parts that you don't like as much as others, and you wish you would see more. So, I don't know. I think that the family is getting a little bit too big, admittedly, but I think they handle it fairly well, and we're obviously going to see more in Fast 11, and they definitely pumped up the stakes from the last few as well. Like, that actually feels like our characters are in a bit of a jeopardy, like, for once. And so we'll see how that plays out in Fast 11. If they actually do decide to, like, kill off a character for good or something like that, we'll see what happens. But yeah, a lot of moving parts here, but I still think that it came together decent enough, and I still enjoyed it. So Fast X goes here. Next up, we have The Boogeyman, which is a movie that I didn't quite enjoy as much as Fast X, and I'm gonna put it in the let's put it in the C tier, below 65. This is just a very, very familiar, generic horror movie for me. I feel like I've seen 3 or 4 other movies just like The Boogeyman, and I don't think that our main characters are all that interesting. I don't think that the villain's all that interesting. There's even some things that don't really make sense with, like, how he works. Like, why aren't our characters using flashlights more often to stop him? Like, there's a lot of things that I could complain about with this movie, but my general consensus is that it's just very, very generic and familiar, and there's just nothing really that stands out about The Boogeyman. I'm not trying to bring this movie down at all. There's some people that that liked it a little bit more than I did, but I just thought it was just kind of like every other modern horror movie, and yeah, it just had all the things that I do not like about modern horror movies in it. And I don't want to go in depth about that, but yeah, the Boogeyman goes in the C tier. Next up on the list, we got Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and this was a movie, another one of those movies where I definitely had a lot of recency bias coming straight out of the theater for this movie, and so, like I said with Scream 6, if you would have asked me right after I watched this movie where I would place it on my end of the year rankings, I probably would have told you number one, and it probably would have landed somewhere up in the S tier. But realistically, I'm going to put it at the top of the A tier. I had a really, really fun time with this movie. It's just a little bit frustrating that a 2 hour, almost 2.5 hour animated film, it felt like, how do you want to say it? Obviously, this is part one of 2 movies, and it just felt like we didn't really complete a full story. And, you know, I don't know. There's been a lot of part 1, part 2 movies this year, and a lot of them have kind of, and I forgot to mention this with Fast X, just a lot of them have ended at weird, like, places where, you know, we get it. It's part 1, part 2, but you also still have to create a full movie, and this feels like one half of a movie, which shouldn't be the case for a movie that's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So it didn't feel like a complete movie overall, and it should be, despite that it is a part 1. And, you know, some people have said, well, it was the complete story of Gwen, and, you know, I could see some arguments for that, but I don't know. And, you know, now we have to wait however many years to maybe, obviously, whenever part 2 comes out, it could be a make or break, you know, it could make this movie, go down a little bit, or it could help this movie, and then I won't be complaining at the fact that this wasn't a complete story. So we'll see what happens, but as of right now, we're kind of in that gray area where we don't really know exactly where it could go. Honestly, this placement right here is subject to change, but I still really enjoyed Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Obviously, the animation is outstanding. Every single different frame is like a different piece of artwork, and it's just so amazing. And it really pushes the limits of what you can do with animation and the unique things that you can do with animation that you can't do with live action movies, and how it's able to convey emotions and make them resonate a lot more with the animation. So I really like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I still enjoyed it, but it just doesn't feel like a complete movie, which is my kind of main issue with it. Next up, we got Transformers Rise of the Beast. I'm going to put this in the B tier. I'll put it above Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. And a nice refreshing return to the Transformers franchise, kind of like with Fast X, you know, especially with Michael Bay really going over the top every single time and trying to outdo ourselves. And this one dials it back a little bit and focuses on our characters a lot more and their character arcs and whatnot, kind of like they did with Bumblebee. And, well, you see how that played out. Worked really, really well. And so Transformers Rise of the Beast is just a kind of a nice balance of that over-the-top action and that character-focused stuff. I do like our main Autobot in here. I believe it was voiced by Pete Davidson. I can't remember the name of the Autobot exactly, but it was voiced by Pete Davidson. I like our main character in here. I like his story in here. And yeah, overall, I enjoyed Transformers. Nothing amazing, you know, nothing in it that would stand out amongst the crowd in any way. But yeah, I liked this movie, and I'm looking forward to the future ones. Next up, we got The Flash, another movie that has gotten a lot of slack over the year, and I still really, really enjoyed this movie. I'm not going to forget how much I enjoyed this movie walking out of the theater and just really liking it. So The Flash is going to go in the A tier. I'm going to sandwich it right in between Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and Terrifier 2. I still really dug this movie. The superhero action, obviously not really anything that we've never seen before, or anything like that. But I think what I really liked about it was the story. The story really worked really, really well for me. And what stood out amongst the crowd. There we go. And I liked the whole multiverse stuff. Well, I didn't like the multiverse stuff so much as I did like the time travel stuff and how that played into the story here, where he wants to go back in time and just kind of see how his parents felt before, or like see if he can maybe fix anything, or like fix any broken bridges that he may have had with his parents. And so I just really, really connect with that story. Not that I like relate to it in any way, but I just really like the story overall. And I thought that the ending was a very, very emotional, but satisfying conclusion overall, where he kind of just accepts, like, hey, you know, if I try to change stuff, it's just going to make it worse. So I just kind of have to say my final goodbyes and accept reality, I guess you want to say. And so, yeah, The Flash, obviously, there was probably one of the most hyped up, anticipated movies of the year, and definitely was not as great as it should have been. The CGI for the budget was ridiculously, was just not what it should have been, not up to par. Yeah, for a movie with this big of a budget, there's no excuse for how the CGI looked. Michael Keaton, I'm not somebody who was ever a big fan of the 89 Batman or anything like that, so I can't really say anything there, but I did enjoy him in here. The Supergirl, whatever, I didn't really care for. So some of the cameos I honestly wasn't a huge fan of. I just really liked the story. The story is what really carried this movie forward for me, and so I got a kick out of it. We have Elemental, which was just a nice little Disney rom-com that I feel like just hasn't had a whole lot of... There just hasn't been a whole lot of conversation about it throughout the year, and I guess understandably so. I mean, you know, Disney obviously not the best reputation right now, and just not a lot of people too excited for any new Disney movies because, you know, they just haven't really changed much. But I feel like Elemental is has just the good part of Disney, where it's an original story. It's not a live action remake or a rehash of any of the old Disney stories or anything like that. It's a Disney original. It's you know, a completely new story. It's a rom-com. You don't really see those in kids' movies very often. And it just was a very, very charming, pleasant movie overall. I really enjoyed Elemental. And so I am going to put it in B+ above Puss in Boots. I really liked Elemental. I liked the story. I liked some of the issues it tackled and whatnot. And I liked our two main characters, Wade and Ember, in here. I liked that, like I said, I like the themes that it touched with parenting and dating and assimilation, immigration, all that kind of stuff. Just all really, really worked well for me. And so, yeah, Elemental, just a pleasant little Disney Pixar film. And I think should be one of the leading examples, along with like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, of what Disney needs to do to kind of get back to the glory days, I guess you want to say. And that's not to say that Elemental is anything incredible or anything like that, but it's just so refreshing to watch a Disney animated film amongst what feels like the worst, like what feels like all this different backlash coming against Disney and all that kind of stuff, saying how it's like all really terrible and all that. But I think this shows that they can still make good stuff. They just kind of need to go back to the basics and realize like what really, really worked well and what was that winning formula in those earlier Disney movies, or those Disney movies in their best time periods or whatever. So Elemental, just a nice, pleasant animated film. I think that the animation definitely got overshadowed by Spider-Man, which came out in the same month. The animation, I think, looks really, really good, and I hope that it will be in some kind of conversation for one of the best animated films of the year, because I think it looked really, really nice. So that's pretty much it. Next up, we got Insidious, The Red Door, and I think there's some amount of enjoyment to be had here with this movie, but just not great. I'm actually going to put it above 65 and The Boogeyman, but they're all kind of in that spot where there's some things to be had with it that are enjoyable enough, like with The Boogeyman, an enjoyable enough horror movie, 65, an enjoyable enough sci-fi movie, Insidious, The Red Door, an enjoyable enough Insidious movie. And but either way, like as far as it goes, like as far as its role in the Insidious franchise, it really has no purpose whatsoever. They try to explore something different, but it just doesn't really work well because we already know what happened in the first few Insidious movies, and so it just doesn't bring anything new to the table, really. And And this movie, I found this out not too long ago, it was actually directed by Patrick Wilson, and I kind of like the stuff that he did with his own character in this movie and some of the struggles that he dealt with. I thought that was probably the most interesting part about it. So I thought the most interesting part was probably just his struggles along with his son's struggles in this movie, and their kind of realization and remembering like what happened in those first few Insidious movies. I like the roommate of Ty Simpkin, that's not the name of the character in this movie, but he's played by Ty Simpkin, however you say. I can't remember what I'm losing my mind here, but I really like the roommate here. I thought she was very charming, energetic, brought some some comedic comedic relief to this movie. So yeah, there's some redeeming qualities to this movie, but otherwise, as an Insidious movie, just very, very frivolous and doesn't really provide anything, or doesn't bring anything new to the table for the Insidious franchise. Next up, we got Sound of Freedom. Talk about big successes of this year, and I'm gonna put Sound of Freedom, I'm gonna put it up in the A tier. I'll put it, where should I put it? I'll put it right in between Guardians and The Flash. Definitely left me with a big impact after watching it. I don't think that it's this masterpiece or movie that is free of any criticism just because of the issues that it is tackling, but it definitely doesn't deserve to be, definitely doesn't deserve to be, I guess, like, I don't understand what the controversy over this film is for some people. Like, it's pushing a really, really great message that needs to resonate around the world, and I don't see how you could really dislike this film in any way. This message, the message is usually something very, very taboo that people just don't want to talk about, but needs to be in conversations. And so I just really like what this movie did at spreading the word of this issue, and I'm really, really I really, really trust that the money that this movie made and the success of it will all probably go into the right place. Jim Caviezel, not very familiar with the actor, but there was a lot of talk about him when this movie came out. I saw some interviews with him from the Daily Wire and whatnot, and he just seems like a very, very likable guy. I liked him in here as playing the actual hero in this movie, which Sound of Freedom. Definitely left one of the biggest impacts of the year for me. I watched this in a crowded theater, and it was really, really great. There was an applause after the movie, just one of those movies that I think that everybody needs to see, just so that it can really resonate with you and, motivate you to want to make a difference in the world, honestly. And, so Sound of Freedom, I feel like I'm missing something here. Oh, yeah, this was one of the few movies that were made by Angel Studios that I watched this year. There was one other one in here that I'll talk about later that was made by Angel Studios, but I think that they're really making a big name for themselves. They're starting to really build up their reputation, and Sound of Freedom, definitely one of the bigger movies of the year for them. Next up, we got Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Mission Impossible 7 for short, and I really loved this movie. This is going up in the S tier for me. I mean, maybe, I don't want to, how do you want to say it? I feel like I'm being a little bit too generous here. I feel like maybe like A+, but it's like bordering on like A+ and S tier, but I'm just going to give it the S tier because this is one of the bigger surprises of the year for me. I had never seen a Mission Impossible movie prior to watching this, and I just think that the fact that a 2-hour and like almost 3-hour action film that of a part of the 7th movie in a franchise that I've never watched managed to be one of the most enjoyable and one of my favorite movies of the year. I think that's like the biggest thing that surprises me, and I just think it shows that Tom Cruise, what that man can do at his age is just really incredible. I wish that they wouldn't have spoiled some of the stunts so much in some of the trailers. They shouldn't have showed some of their major stunts in here, because when they showed them in the movie, they weren't as like as amazing or spectacular as they would have been had it been the first time you've seen them. But they showed them so much in the trailers, and I think that was maybe because they were trying to say, like, get people to buy tickets because they knew, well, maybe this movie's not going to do as great as we thought it was going to be, which really sucks because this movie, if you watched my box office successes and failures, this was fortunately in one of my failures because it just has such a massive budget. But I still really enjoyed Mission Impossible. Still in my, like, top 5 or 3, like, top 5, top 3 movies of the year for me, and I really got a kick out of it, and so, yeah, it goes in the S tier. Next up, we got Barbie. You can't talk about 2023 without talking about these next 2 films, and Barbie in particular, probably the pop culture movie of the year. It's just been, as far as the actors and the director and the soundtrack, which was a huge hit and was constantly being played on the radio, a few songs on there. All of it was just, like a part of, just talked about so much this year and just made a huge impact on 2023 and pop culture and whatnot. And Barbie is obviously not a movie built for me. This is a movie that, as far as I see, is built for women between, like, the ages of, like, 15 and 35. But I feel like, as far as my experience went, I saw women of just all ages really just having a fun time with this movie, coming in big groups, dressed up in pink outfits, and just having a fun time, which I really like to see. And even I went into a packed theater. I wore a pink shirt. And had a really, really fun time with this movie. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. I'm going to stick it in the B tier in between, like, Transformers and Ant-Man. Maybe even above Transformers. I'll be a little bit more generous. But this is obviously not a movie built for me. And I guess before finding out this movie had a PG-13 rating, the way that it was marketed made it seem like this was going to be another one of those Barbie movies where it slaps on the Barbie brand and it's, advertised towards kids. But this movie, the way that it conveys its message and the director's vision is not in a way that kids are going to be able to understand. And it's kind of assuming that you already agree with the director. And so if you don't agree with the director, you're probably not going to enjoy this movie as much as other people will, particularly people who do agree with her. And so the scenes where she was throwing out, stuff about the patriarchy and about today's societal standards and that huge monologue scene with America Ferrera, all that kind of stuff to me just felt very, very preachy, and I was just longing for, especially that monologue scene, to just end. But I still had a lot of fun with this movie overall. That was kind of my main issue with it, is I just thought that it was kind of weird how it seemed like it was marketed towards kids, but the way that the message is conveyed really is only going to work for people who already agree with it, people who are, like, in their 20s, in their early 30s, that kind of stuff. But I still had a fun time with it. I loved how Ryan Gosling, in particular, just able to really do his own thing here and have fun with the whole movie and whatnot. I really enjoyed him in here. It's really easy to root for him, especially when I know him for some of his earlier roles and, like, Goosebumps and whatnot. But yeah, I just had a fun time with it. I will say, like, there's some parts to it that I thought were kind of a waste of time, like the whole Mattel thing. I mean, I get they have to tie it in with Mattel because, obviously Barbie is a product of Mattel, but the whole, like, Mattel Corporation thing with, like, Will Ferrell and him, like, chasing after Barbie and try to get her back in the box or whatever, I thought that it didn't really go anywhere in the movie. And kind of the bigger part of the film was when all the Kens take over Barbie land and then they have to take it back and whatnot and bring things back to normal. But otherwise, I still had a really fun time with this movie. It's biggest conversation of the year, probably, at least as far as movies go. And these next 2 movies will go down in history for their impact that they made on cinema. Next up, we have Oppenheimer, and I don't think that Christopher Nolan has ever made a movie that has emphasized so much his incredible talent and how he's just able to take not just characters like Batman, who are obviously very, very popular, but historical figures like Oppenheimer, who many people don't think about and don't think about their personal struggles and how they may have been impacted by huge historical events. And he's just able to take those characters, humanize them, tell their story, and leave a huge impact on you and make it all really interesting. This is a 3-hour rated R biopic, and it made almost $1 billion. I think that speaks for itself. And while you might be able to attribute a lot of that success to the Barbenheimer trend and how people were like, hey, Barbie and Oppenheimer, two polar opposite movies coming out the same weekend. How about we make a huge thing out of this? And so, yeah, maybe a lot of that was boosted by some of it. But I think that the spark wouldn't have been there had this not been a good movie. Like, people are not going to... most people might joke about Oppenheimer, but they're not going to go to a 3-hour rated R movie for nothing. They're not going to pay for their tickets for nothing. They obviously were anticipating this to be a very, very great film, in which it was. Christopher Nolan, just such a talented guy, and this movie is much, much beyond just a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of it. Obviously, an incredible theatrical experience to watch. I loved how they delayed the sound after it was detonated and waited a long time until we heard it, but in the meantime, we were just able to focus on the sheer size and mass of the bomb spreading throughout the desert and just watching the whole thing go down. It was just really an incredible theatrical experience. But this movie is obviously much, much more beyond that. The latter half of the movie is pretty much just Senate hearings and interrogations, and I think it's just incredible how Christopher Nolan is able to make that interesting, and how I was literally like shaking by mere dialogue by the ending of the film, and just like really, really invested in all the stuff going on. There are a lot of moving parts in Oppenheimer, and a lot of stuff to be paying attention to, but I think even if like you can't fully understand everything, you still have a pretty good idea of it. It's not like a movie that I'll talk about later, Napoleon, where it feels like a continuous monologue. I think that the way that everything was pieced together, where we have those scenes in the Senate hearings where it's in black and white, which I thought that was a really cool small detail, and then the scenes where we go back to Oppenheimer and him gathering scientists to construct this nuclear bomb for World War II and bringing it to Los Alamos, getting ready to deploy it. And I think just the whole way that the whole plot of the movie, how it was all pieced together, was just done very, very nicely. And even though, like I said, there are a lot of moving parts, you can still understand it, at least briefly, and leave the theater having a big impact and thinking about how all of this, the construction of the nuclear bomb, has not only affected Oppenheimer, and you very, very clearly see the huge impact that it has made on him, and Cillian Murphy is just able to convey that very, very well. He's an incredible actor, and I think he really showed that in this movie. But you not only see how it impacted Oppenheimer, but you see how it has impacted you, and just how the Cold War and all that kind of stuff has affected us today, and how we still are instilled with great fear of the huge destruction that the nuclear bomb could bring to us. And so, yeah, Oppenheimer, just an amazing film. I think that, like I said, it really emphasizes Christopher Nolan's incredible talent and how he's able to take these seemingly uninteresting stories to many and make them interesting. So Oppenheimer absolutely goes into the S tier. I could talk all day about some of the smaller, finer details that Christopher Nolan does in here, the cinematic details that he throws in here that are just absolutely incredible. There's some very, very great standout scenes, but I would be here all day. This movie is just really, really great, obviously, and obviously for many people is their best movie of the year. This will most definitely win a lot of awards for many of the actors involved. I could go on all in day about Robert Downey Jr. and his incredible acting talent outside of the MCU, and even Matt Damon in here I thought was great for a little comedic relief, and Cillian Murphy, obviously. I could go on all day, but you guys know how great Oppenheimer is. I don't need to go over it, so it goes in the S tier. Next up, we have Cobweb, a bit more of an unfamiliar film, and this movie actually came out in theaters way back in July. I did not get to see it until it came out on streaming a few months ago. I was really hoping that it was going to be playing in my local theaters because I heard about it from a prominent movie reviewer, and the plot sounded very, very familiar to me because I was pretty sure I had seen some kind of short horror story that was very similar to this. But despite all of that, it still surprised me with some of the kind of twists and turns, particularly at the ending of the movie, that take a very, very dark turn. I think that any horror fan, especially if you're into like psychological horror, like The Babadook and whatnot, I think you'll really like this film. I didn't enjoy it too much, so I would put it like top of the C tier. Mainly just because I was like it. I thought it was interesting how it still kind of surprised me with some of the ways it went, despite having prior knowledge on the story and whatnot. But essentially, it's like, if you want to know, it's about this like single child who I believe moves into a new school, and there's like this new teacher who is getting a little bit worried about like what's going on. He's doing some like, there's some weird stuff going on with him, and so she tries to kind of have a conversation with the parents. They're very, very discreet about things, and like last about 30, I believe it was like 20-30 minutes of the movie take a very, very, very dark turn, and things get very, very interesting. So yeah, Cobweb, if you're kind of into those types of movies, as psychological thrillers or horror movies, I think you'll like this one. But for me, it wasn't really for me so much. But still kind of surprised me despite having some prior knowledge on it. Next up, we have The Meg 2, and there's really not a whole lot to talk about with this movie. I think for a Meg movie, it did enough to satisfy me. Threw in a few new, like, sea creatures in there, but otherwise, the only thing that they really do with The Meg is like, oh, well, you thought the last Meg was big, well, this one's even bigger, and that's pretty much all that it does here. A lot of the same stuff that we've seen in the first Meg, which I really, really enjoyed, and so it was enough to satisfy me. I liked some of the new side characters that were thrown in here. I enjoyed them, but otherwise, nothing really, like, amazing that it brought to the table for this one, and so I'm going to put it, like, top of the C tier. I still enjoyed it, but I don't think good enough to put it in the B tier. I think it's slightly below average, but it did just enough for me to be satisfied. Would I ever watch this again? No. I would instead watch the first Meg, which I enjoyed a lot more, so it goes here. Next up, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. Just a very, very pleasant film, and I'm going to put it in the B+. I'm going to put it above Super Mario Bros. I actually enjoyed this movie a little bit more. I've always been more of a fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's what actually got me into martial arts, and I was always a big fan of the original 90s trilogy for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And, yeah, the Mutant Mayhem, it's just a pleasant little film, and I like how they're going to set up the future sequels for this movie, and I'm excited. I just thought it was a cute little animated film. I enjoyed it, and there's not really a whole lot to say with this one either. Next up, we have The Last Voyage of the Demeter. I'm going to put this probably at the bottom of the B+, because I didn't quite enjoy it as much as all of the other ones on here, but I still thought it was a pretty solid film, and I know that I'm in probably a small boat here, that no pun intended, but yeah, there was a lot of people who unfortunately didn't like this movie as much as I did. But this movie, I really like the atmosphere. Like I said, I've talked about this movie many times. I like the atmosphere, being on the boat with the Dracula attacking, I think just works really well. I was very surprised by the brutality of the kills in here. And I like our main character as well. I like how it is even able to show some of the... to sort of represent the time period pretty well, and establish the time period pretty well of the later 19th century with some of the smaller details they throw in here. And this is based off of, I believe, a Dracula novel from the late 19th century, if I'm not wrong. And so they're at the ending of the movie, they sort of set up the second chapter to that novel, and I'm really excited for it. It's going to be in a different setting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do there. So The Last Voyage of the Demeter, while I'm in probably a small boat here, worked pretty well for me. Next up, we have Strays, probably the movie that I've talked about the least here. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but pretty forgettable, I would say, raunchy comedy. Pretty standard, slightly below average, I would say. But I still had a pretty fairly good time with it. I'd put it in between Cobweb and Meg 2, right here in the C tier. Like I said, if you like dogs and you like raunchy comedies, you're going to like this one. You know, if you like The Secret Life of Pets and you want basically a rated R version of that, you're going to like this movie. I like Will Forte. He's one of my more favorite comedians. I think Will Ferrell does a pretty good job here. You got Jamie Foxx as well. Yeah, it's fine, but I would say pretty forgettable for the most part, and so that's why it goes here. Next up, we have Blue Beetle, one of the bigger surprises of the year for me, because if you watched my biggest surprises and disappointments video, I was pretty much under the impression after they made the announcement that the DCEU was going to be ending, that a lot of these leftover DCEU films in 2023 were probably doomed and probably weren't going to be great in the first place. Never been a huge fan of the DCU. It's kind of always just been all over the place. But Blue Beetle was actually a pleasant superhero flick overall, and so I'd put it in the B+. I would put it I'd put it like right here, between Elemental and Fast X. I enjoyed Blue Beetle. I liked the family-oriented aspect of it. I like George Lopez. He's one of more of my favorite comedians. Yeah, I just like the family-oriented aspect to it. The superhero itself is obviously more of an unfamiliar superhero, but very familiar. Are very similar to many other superheroes we've seen, like Iron Man and Ant-Man, but I think it's still fine for what it is. I enjoyed Blue Beetle, just a pleasant little superhero flick, and I enjoyed that it wasn't really just focused on setting up a billion, DCEU films in the future. Obviously, the DCU is ending anyway, so that doesn't matter. But I just liked how it was just focused on our main character here, and the family actually did play a big role in the plot. And it felt like when our character was impacted by something, his entire family was impacted by something as well. And I like the main actor here, Zola, however you pronounce his name. And I believe that he will continue to be the actor for Blue Beetle. I'm not really sure with how things are going to play out for the DCEU. People were saying that the Flash was going to be the one to reset the universe, and that didn't really turn out to be true. So who knows? But I really do hope that he will be able to return as Blue Beetle whenever they do reset the universe, because I liked him as Blue Beetle here. But yeah, pleasant little superhero flick, not much more to say. Next up, we have Gran Turismo, and talk about a movie that I just had absolutely no faith in. I just saw this film as another one of those movies that slaps on the based on the true story title to sell tickets, and the Gran Turismo title to sell tickets, even though it's probably not going to have anything to do with the video game at all, and all that kind of, I just was not sold on this movie. And while it didn't do too well at the box office, it actually did pretty well for me, and I thought this was actually a solid underdog story, A-tier underdog story, and I like it underdog stories, so I'm going to put it up in the A-tier, bottom of the A-tier, but I still had a really, really great time with this. And trust me, I was not as convinced of this story as David Harbour was when he found out that he had to be teaching gamers how to become actual racers, but everything turned out to work out pretty well. I like David Harbour in here. I like the racing sequences. Not a huge racing fan, but they did work really well for me. And I think that they're able to tie in the racing simulator stuff really well in with the slow-mo sequences during the races and whatnot. So that worked really, really well for me. And I like their character arc in here. He has, obviously starts out kind of down here, but he has a lot of ambition, gets up here for a moment, drops for a minute, and comes. So it's, kind of a roller coaster throughout the movie, but I really do like our character arc overall. And I like even stuff that they do with the corporation of the car corporations like Nissan and whatnot. We have he's played by Orlando Bloom, but he's I believe the CEO of Nissan, I'm pretty sure, who came up with this idea to give gamers the opportunity to become actual racers. And I just thought all the stuff surrounded around that was actually really, really cool. Where he does his presentation towards these different car companies of we should try this out and, see how it goes. We could get, a bunch of sales with this or whatnot. And I thought that stuff was actually kind of cool and interesting as well. So, this was a really, really solid movie. One of the biggest surprises of the year for me, and I just had so many doubts, and it really just was able to fulfill all of them, and so it worked really well for me. Next up, we have Dumb Money, the movie about the GameStop stock market crash. And Dumb Money, I will put it, I'm gonna put it in the C tier. I'm gonna put it in between Cobweb and Strays. Not too bad. There was some fun to be had with this movie. Whenever the GameStop, the whole story with GameStop and the stock market crash all happened, I thought that the story was kind of interesting, and this movie goes in a little bit more depth and talks about some of the stuff behind that, and I thought it was interesting. It was kind of cool to root for these like sort of underdog characters who are trying to beat Wall Street basically, and they end up being successful in that. So I thought all that kind of stuff was cool, the investing stuff, and our main character, and just some of his interesting archetypes. But yeah, Dumb Money, an interesting little film, but nothing too incredible. Next up, we have The Retirement Plan, one of the few movies on this list that was just absolutely built for me. I'm a big Nicolas Cage fan. I like action movies, and I just love the concept overall of Nicolas Cage being this retired beach bum where he's got his daughter who now had her own kid, and so now he has a grandkid and sends that kid to safety to his dad, who's now living in the Cayman Islands, because she's in a bit of trouble with these drug dealers back in Miami, and now they all figure out where the kid went with this like device, this USB that they need or something like that. And so Nicolas Cage is just kicking some ass with these drug dealers in the movie or whatever, and even have some other actors in here that I'm a big fan of. You got Ron Perlman from Hellboy, obviously. You even got Ernie Hudson in here, who has a little fun. We have a little fun sequence with him as well in here. And so overall, The Retirement Plan, just a movie that was really just built for me, honestly. I know that some people weren't too big of a fan of it, but I really had a fun time with The Retirement Plan. Kind of like other movies that came out in the year, like Machine and a few other movies that I can't think of off the top of my head. It's one of those movies where it's built for some people, but then other people are just not going to find it all that interesting. So I could totally understand why you might have it like down C tier or D tier, whatever. I'm going to put this up in like B+. I really enjoyed this movie. I'd put it top of B+, honestly. I really had a fun time with The Retirement Plan. Like I said, this movie, all the stars aligned, and so that's why I really had a fun time with it. And I had a fun time with the cast, obviously, and really just loved the crazy concept for it. And so, yeah, it goes here. Next up, we have Totally Killer, the second of two movies on here that I watched on streaming. Cobweb was the other movie that I watched on streaming. And this is the whole reason why I actually got my Amazon subscription in the first place, because this movie was absolutely stacked. The cast was absolutely stacked with actors that I'm very, very familiar with and that I really do enjoy. And so I wasn't going to pass up this Back to the Future horror slasher, essentially, and I had a lot of fun with it. Like I said, it's kind of like this Back to the Future horror slasher movie, very similar to movies like Happy Death Day and whatnot, and I just had a really fun time with the cast. Our main actor, our actress here, I'm not really familiar with her. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she wasn't the reason why I came to this movie, and I thought that she was okay. I think that the whole concept is obviously that she's kind of young and naive and very, very surprised by how people were in the 80s, and there were parts of that I liked and also I didn't really like, so I don't know. I had a fun time with Totally Killer. And just kind of another movie, kind of like with Retirement Plan, where there was a lot going for it before I even watched it, to where I was going to enjoy it either way it went. So, Totally Killer, I'd put it like, I'm going to be generous, I'll put it in the B+, like, probably right around here. Had a really fun time with the cast and the concept and whatnot, and so very, very hard to dislike this movie. Next up, we have The Creator, which unfortunately was one of the bigger disappointments of the year for me. And there was a lot of early talk about this movie, and I think that really the biggest thing going for it was the visuals, and I think that's what sold this movie. People were like, hey, look at this movie. Fairly small budget. The visuals look really good. This looks like it could be a decent sci-fi flick. And overall, I was just kind of bored throughout much of the movie. You know, I want to be generous and put it here, but honestly, how I felt throughout the whole movie, I was just kind of like, I was kind of here, really. So I'm gonna put it in the D tier, above Winnie the Pooh, but not so great. I just didn't find the story that interesting. Like I said, the visuals looked really great, but I think there was just so much more that they could have explored with the AI stuff and just, you know, all of it, and just not too great. There was even like other movies on this list that that had a little bit of sci-fi thrown into them, that when it was like during the sci-fi scenes, like with 65, I feel like I had even like I enjoyed it a little bit more than this movie, which is like sci-fi, like the whole thing is like all sci-fi. So I don't know, the creator just didn't really work for me. Next up, we have Saw X, which alternatively was one of the biggest surprises of the year for me, and I very much did enjoy. And I've talked about this ad nauseum since it has come out, but just to kind of summarize things, I would have never expected when I had first saw the trailer for this movie that this was going to be regarded as the best movie in the franchise by many now, and it just like the 10th movie in any franchise, you would just never see that as being the case. But Saw X, I really had a great time with this, and it, like, looking back at it, it makes sense. You know, you put Tobin Bell, our main focus, Jigsaw, our main focus of, like, pretty much all of the Saw movies, and you just put him front and center, and you make him the star of the show, and you put him on the screen for the longest time, like, for more than anybody else, it's going to work out pretty well. And, you know, maybe the traps aren't the biggest thing going for it. Maybe they're not, like, the best out of the franchise, but the villains, like, these are probably the most despicable villains that we've seen in here and have a legitimate reason to be tested. You know, you hate them and you want to see them suffer. But at the same time, like, this movie also, for once, does a good job at pointing out some of the hypocrisies of John's work, and his moral code and whatnot. And I really hope that they continue to expand on that when they move into Saw 11. So there's a lot of potential still going for this, I guess, trilogy that they're probably planning to do with the Saw movies. But yeah, I really like how they really make this feel like this is one of the earlier Saw entries, and they just bring everything back to how it used to be with the color palette and the dialogue, and don't have a super convoluted story either. You can very much understand this, and yeah, I really like Saw X, so I'm going to smack it up in the A tier, probably above Terrifier 2 and Evil Dead Rise, which would make sense because I had this at number 1 in my horror rankings, even though Missing is all the way up there, but yeah, Saw X, I've had enough talking about this movie, so there you go. You have Five Nights at Freddy's, and I don't know, the more I think about this movie, the less I like about it. It's just been one of those movies of the year for me, and I don't know, this movie just had a lot more potential. I still had a good time with it. I really liked the story. I thought it was I was pretty engaged in it. I like Josh Hutcherson in here. But just the most disappointing part had to be, like, the actual video game adaptation side of things, where I just don't think that they were really, it seems fairly easy to do. So many movies nowadays have so many jump scares, and then I'm complaining about this movie not having enough, because it's a FNAF movie, obviously. That's what FNAF is popular for, is its jump scares and whatnot, and it just didn't really have a whole lot of that. So I don't know, FNAF, I'm honestly going to put it in the C tier. I'm going to put it top of the C tier, but I still had a fairly good time with it. Like I said, I like the story. Some of the characters in here, I don't really enjoy them. Josh Hutcherson, though, I really liked him in here. Really cool just to see that guy, how far he's come from seeing him play in movies like Zathura and some of those early 2000s movies, and now he's playing kind of like a fatherly character, essentially, in this movie. And I just think that's really, really cool. And so FNAF, well, FNAF fans, I think, will enjoy this and will appreciate it. I really hope that in the future FNAF sequels that, because they'll probably make them with how successful this movie did, I really hope that they will implement more of the stuff that people really enjoy about the video game itself. Next up, we have The Marvels, and this is a movie that just... It's just like, you know, in the Emoji movie, which wasn't a good movie either. You know how they have, like, that one emoji that they introduced called, like, meh or whatever? This is, like, what this movie is for me. And yeah, it's D tier. I'm gonna put it below Winnie the Pooh. Like, I don't think that Winnie the Pooh is a better made movie than The Marvels, but I at least enjoyed it a little bit more. But The Marvels just had no excuse for how bad it was. And yeah, it was just like, you know, I mean, I wasn't expecting a whole lot of it in the first place with the MCU's recent reputation. But there's a few redeeming qualities. There's a few, like, superficially enjoyable things about it. I think that, like, Brie Larson in here is a little bit more likable than she was in the first Captain Marvel. And our other Marvels, I guess you want to say, are fine in here. At least this movie wasn't over 2 hours long, because I don't know what I would do if that was the case. But the story and the tone and everything like that is just all over the place. If you haven't watched the 5 billion shows required to fully understand this movie, everything's just going to be a complete mess for you in this movie. So, the Marvels, D tier. Next up, we have Dream Scenario, an interesting little A24 horror comedy that I had some suspicions on that it would be a horror comedy when I read into the details, but I was like, I don't know, maybe that's a little bit too far-fetched. And then movie starts, A24 film, and I was like, okay, maybe I was right. And they start playing some of the dream sequences. I was like, yeah, well, maybe I was right. And yeah, I think that if you're a horror fan, you like A24, this will be an interesting little movie to watch. An interesting concept for a horror comedy, and it worked well enough for me. I'd put it like top of C tier. Other people are gonna like this more than I will, so I would recommend it. Like, I can't really tell you how much you're gonna like this movie, but I had a fun enough time with the concept overall. The beginning of the movie is very much the comedy side of things. You're kind of enjoying this weird concept of Nicolas Cage as this just regular professor at this college, and then all of a sudden people start having dreams where at some point in the dream he's in it, and then back half of the movie takes kind of a dark turn. Everybody turns against him, and that's kind of where the horror side of things come in, and where I think actually Nicolas Cage fits the role pretty well, because Nicolas Cage is just really able to just go like crazy on people and whatnot, and it's believable. He's just one of those guys that can do it, kind of like William Dafoe with Green Goblin and whatnot. So yeah, Dream Scenario, an interesting little movie. I would go check it out. Your experience is definitely going to be different than mine. But I just thought, like, the ending was, I don't know, a little off. Like, it didn't really seem like it was going anywhere, really. But I had a decent enough time with this concept. Next up, we have Next Goal Wins. And, oh boy. So I was never planning on seeing this movie. My mom actually wanted to go check this movie out. And so I was like, okay, you know, Taika Waititi comedy film. It's got Michael Fassbender in it. I'll go check it out. And I don't know. It was just a huge misfire for me. I think that some people might like this movie, but I think most people will probably be in my boat where, I don't know. It just wasn't great. Next Goal Wins. I really hate to be, I mean, I'll put it above the Marvels. I think it has a few additional redeeming qualities to it, but I just didn't like the overall story and where it went, especially at the ending of the movie. On the comedy side of things, it gives you a few chuckles, but most of the comedy is just like making fun of the people for being fat and incompetent, basically. And essentially, it's based off of this true story of America Samoa, which was infamously like one of the worst soccer teams in the world. And this coach comes in from America and helps the team win just one game for like the first time ever in like international soccer or something like that. And so it's a fun little concept. I think Taika Waititi, with a lot of his films, puts in a little bit too much of his style into this movie a little bit. Like, he literally shoehorns himself into like narration scenes that I don't think are really necessary. So yeah, a big misfire for me. There's a few things to be had with it. I mean, I wouldn't recommend this movie, but maybe if you see it on streaming or something like that and you like Taika Waititi, you might like this. But for me, just wasn't a huge fan. Talk about a movie that was built for me, though. You have Thanksgiving. As soon as I seen the trailers for this movie, I instantly wanted to go check it out. And admittedly, this is not a great movie, but I think it's the good side of like fun, bad horror movies, where Winnie the Pooh's kind of the bad side of that. This is kind of like the good side of that, where the dialogue, not the greatest, the characters, not the greatest, but I still had a lot of fun with the concept. You know, I thought it was actually kind of interesting how I feel like it was more ridiculous that they put the villain as like someone wearing a John Carver mask than if like you did somebody wearing like a turkey costume or something like that, even though they do have like some turkeys thrown in here, obviously. But I had a fun time with Thanksgiving. Not really a whole lot to say. I would put Thanksgiving, I'd put it in like B+. This movie really worked for me. I would put it like I'd probably put it like right here. I really liked, I had a lot of fun with Thanksgiving. Like I said, this is another movie, one of those movies where all the stars kind of aligned and all, like, everything that I like about a movie was kind of already pre-established with this, and so it was kind of like a guarantee that I was going to at least enjoy it. And I just like the dark humor. I like the gore. I like the kills. Some of them are kind of like Thanksgiving themed. And yeah, I had a fun time with it. So even though like the killer maybe pretty predictable in this movie, I still had a pretty good time with Thanksgiving. Next up, we have Napoleon. Yet again, another historical drama slash biopic on here. And this one in particular, I was very, very excited about because this is directed by Ridley Scott. It's got Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon himself. And the trailers looked very, very solid. But unfortunately, when you make a movie as big of scale as this, where you're talking about as significant as a character as it gets with Napoleon Bonaparte, unfortunately, when you don't, pull things off 100%, it's gonna feel like an even bigger disappointment. And I still enjoyed Napoleon. There were still a lot of parts to it that I really, really enjoyed. I think that out of all of the historical dramas and biopics that I watched this year, this one does the best job at capturing the time period and making it really feel like you were actually in there. With just the costume designs, the dialogue, all that kind of stuff. I think they really, really nailed that one in the coffin. And I also really like the battle sequences. I think they're really able to convey the beauty and the horror at the same time, with especially the nighttime battle sequences. I thought those were very, very beautifully shot and just looked very, very visually just looked very, very nice. And there was also a battle that was taken over like a frozen lake, and when like the soldiers would die and the horses would die, they'd like drown in like in the frozen lake water, and I thought that was really, really a good part of it as well. And so yeah, there's still a lot of stuff that I enjoyed about Napoleon. I wasn't bored sitting through this almost 3-hour movie. But yeah, like I said, like when you try to make a movie about a character as significant as this, even if it was like 3.5 hours long, I still feel like it would be very, very hard to pull off. And so the main issue that I have with this movie is that it just has to kind of go from major event to major event, just skipping just rushing through, because we don't really have a whole lot of time to really focus on them and focus on like the consequences and the impact and how this is affecting Napoleon himself. It's just kind of like, oh, this is happening, now we're moving on to this. And so by the time that you get to the ending of the movie and Napoleon dies, you're kind of just like, it's kind of like you're just kind of like dispassionate about it. You're just kind of like, okay, that movie's over, I guess. And it's kind of like, it's kind of a little bit funny as well, because you're just like, oh, okay, movie's over, like, because there's no impact behind anything, and you weren't really able to see like the in-between stuff of how like Napoleon changed over time and how these events impacted and whatnot. So there's just really no through line in Napoleon. We're just kind of going from event to event. And like I said, it's very hard to do a feature-length movie about a character as significant as this. But look at Oppenheimer. I mean, Oppenheimer took place during multiple time periods as well. We go from his early life. We talk about when he's preparing the nuclear bomb in Los Alamos. We talk about the Senate hearings that are about 10 years later. So there's a lot of moving parts to Oppenheimer, and it's still able to handle it all pretty well. So I don't think there's a whole lot of excuse here for Napoleon, but I still enjoyed it overall. Like, I'm not like mad at it or anything like that, but it clearly had a lot more potential and could have been a lot better. But I think Joaquin Phoenix does a really, really great job as the eccentric character, I would say, best way to describe him, of Napoleon in here. I think Vanessa Kirby does a great job as well, even though that I'm usually not too tied into the love story arcs in a lot of these historical dramas that have come out this year. I feel like this was the one that was probably the most purposeful. And some of the other ones, like, they just don't really go anywhere with it. But I feel like they really focused a whole lot of time on developing that love story arc. And I'm not really sure if they should have, or if they should have focused on other stuff. But I don't know. I think the main thing is that they should have really condensed things down a little bit and focused on some of the major events, and it took time to show the impact that it had on Napoleon and whatnot. So overall, I still really enjoyed this. I really like the battle sequences. I would probably rewatch this again sometime in the future to check it out, but I'll put it in like top B tier, I would say. It definitely had a lot more potential to be like all the way up here, maybe even up here, but unfortunately, just did not execute fully, so it goes in the B tier. Next up, we have Godzilla Minus One, and I'll say right off the bat that I am not as fond of this movie as maybe some other people have been since it was released. This was definitely one of the bigger surprises of the year for me. I know for some people this was one of the biggest surprises, and which is why they have it like at the top of their rankings. Some people saying that this is their number one movie of the year, and I'm not on that boat. I'll say it right off the bat, but I still had a good time with this movie. It surprised me in the sense that I had never seen a Godzilla film prior to this, actually. I have seen King Kong before, but I've never seen Godzilla. I've never seen a Japanese-made film, and I've never seen a film that is in a different language and you have to read subtitles while watching the movie. And so I was really hoping that there would be like a dubbed version of this or something like that so I could go check it out. Because I don't know what the experience was, or I didn't know what the experience was like having to read subtitles throughout the whole film. That sounded really, really, that didn't really sound very enjoyable to me, going into it. But it turned out to be not so bad, and I was still really able to be engaged in the film, and I still had a really good time with Godzilla Minus One. I really like how it's focused on the story and our characters, and you're not rooting for Godzilla throughout this film because they show you some of the devastation that these people have been through, and now there's a new, even bigger threat right after, World War II just hit and the nuclear bomb went off and whatnot. And, now they're suffering even a greater deal. And so when Godzilla pops up on screen, yes, visually it looks really amazing, especially for all these other films that have come out this year with massive budgets, and this movie, not as big of a budget, like a medium-sized budget kind of, and Godzilla looks really, really great in here. But when he pops out on screen, you're not rooting for him. You're actually very, very nervous of what he's about to do because you don't want to see these characters put through even more suffering. And so I really enjoyed Godzilla Minus One. I had a fun time with it. I really like the final act where kind of the whole community comes together to formulate a plan to stop Godzilla. I really, really love that. So I really enjoyed Godzilla Minus One. Like I said, I'm not on the same boat as other people where this is my number one movie. Like, this was such a great movie and I just, like, a huge surprise or whatever. But I still had a really good time with it. And so Godzilla Minus One, I'm going to throw it up in the B+. I'd probably just put it right about there, maybe above Last Voyage. Honestly, well, like, kind of comparing to a lot of these other movies, I would put it, I'd put it like right around, maybe right around here, I would say. Really great movie overall, though. Definitely one of the bigger surprises of the year. But like I said, I'm not as fond of it or enthusiastic about it as maybe some other people are. Next up, we have Silent Night. And I know that this movie was a huge disappointment for a lot of people. The only reason I did not include it on my list of disappointments is because I had already seen reviews prior to it. And so I kind of already knew what to expect out of this movie. And had I not watched the reviews, yes, I probably wouldn't have expected that the entire movie is pretty much mute, just no dialogue whatsoever. I would have not have expected that, and it was kind of annoying. For our main character, it made sense. I think it worked well because he's not able to really show any emotion or let out any emotion throughout the movie. And you can really, really feel his frustration and all these internal rage built up in him that he can't really bring out fully. So that I think that part of it I actually think really worked very well. But with all the other characters being mute, it just didn't really make any sense to me. It just created these awkward scenes where characters are just kind of looking at each other like just nodding at each other, it's like, I don't know. It was very, very weird and very, very strange that the whole entire movie was mute. And I also think there's a few, cheesy things about this movie as well, with, the whole, montage scene where he's, training in his, own little man cave or his, little tool shop or whatever, and his wife just keeps, checking in to watch him, oh, what's he doing now? Oh, he's beating the crap out of a bag or whatever. Oh, cool. So I just thought that part was kind of a little bit, cheesy to me, but he's doing some pull-ups or whatever, beating the shit out of a bag or something, just the whole montage scene. I thought that was a little bit corny, but other than that, I mean, I thought for an action film I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty solid, and it was just really nice to see him just beat up some good old-fashioned bad guys, like, these guys who obviously caused the death of his son, and now he wants to kind of get revenge on him. And so, you want to see those pieces of shit get beat up, and so it works for an action film for me. But I just really wish that it wasn't as awkward as it was, with all the characters just being mute for really no reason. So almost forgot to put this on the tier list. I was about to move on without doing that, but I would put it in like the B tier. I'd put it right in between, maybe like did I have more fun with this movie than Cocaine Bear? I would say yeah. So I'd put it like right around here in the B tier. Definitely had a lot more potential, kind of like with Napoleon, but unfortunately settles right here for me. Next up, we have The Shift, and I would say that this movie is underrated, but there hasn't even really been a whole lot of talk about it this past year, unfortunately. I've only seen maybe one review for this movie. But this is actually made by the same studio that brought to us Sound of Freedom, Angel Studios, and so, as you could expect, this is more of a faith-based film. But the whole reason I went into it, because I didn't even know that until I watched the movie, is because it stars Neil McDonough, who historically is very, very great at playing villainous characters. I think he's one of my favorite underrated actors out there. And also, I saw that it was kind of like a sci-fi. Had a little bit of multiverse tied into it. So I was like, okay, I'll go check this out. And it turned out to be pretty solid overall. It's essentially our main character is going through basically a midlife crisis a little bit, where he's struggling with stuff with his wife, his kids, work, and ends up getting into a car crash where he wakes up into this alternate reality, and this guy named the Benefactor kind of approaches him and kind of explains to him what's going on. Takes him into this restaurant and makes a proposal to him, essentially, where he's like, oh, you could be one of my accomplices and I can bring you great wealth and power. And essentially what the Benefactor does is he takes people and shifts them and kind of tests them and sees, like, tests them, I guess you want to say. Really, it's more of tormenting them, I feel like. But he tests them, kind of sees what makes them tick, kind of sees, like what they will do and kind of that kind of stuff. So he's this very, very interesting character. And like I said, that's why I went into this movie, is for Neil McDonough. And I think he just does a really, really great job in this movie as basically portraying the devil. We learned very, very early on, and it becomes very, very clear that he is essentially the devil in this movie. Where our main character, when they're in that scene in the restaurant, all these different people in there, they all look like they're in distress, even the waiter. And our main character just wants to get back to his wife and kids, and so doesn't really care about this whole proposal, and is just trying to escape from the Benefactor. And so he starts praying in the restaurant to get him to go away, and he ends up like the Benefactor ends up just berating him as he's doing it. And so, like, after that, he jumps to a different reality, and so he jumps to multiple different realities throughout this film, but it's not like he goes from one to one just, like, very, very quickly. He actually spends a good amount of time in each one, spending time with some of the characters in the different ones. You have Sean Astin in here, who's in one of the alternate realities, who I think adds a good comedy bit to it. You have another guy that he meets that has this device that he can basically look through different realities, and that's how he ends up finding his wife and trying to get to her, but he ends up having to make like a big decision at the ending of the movie. That was a very, very emotional scene. And so, yeah, overall, it's not like they just jump through different realities or anything like that. I think that they do a good job with the multiverse stuff, and having our character actually spend time in there and learn different things about the different characters and what's going on in their lives throughout the movie. But yeah, I think that they play a good bit into the multiverse concept in here, which is weird because, like, I would say that there's also some other sci-fi elements in here that I wish that they would have spent more time on to make this a little bit more enjoyable. But overall, I still thought that this was a pretty solid film. Like I said, I think Neil McDonough does a very, very good job. I think our main character does a good job. I like Sean Astin in here. And so overall, pretty solid faith-based film, pretty solid message to it as well, where a character they make it seem like he's kind of struggling with his decision of whether or not he's going to work with the Benefactor or whether or not he just wants to get back to his wife. But it makes it very, very clear, like, no, he's very, very devoted to his faith. He wants to get back to his wife. He's not going to listen to this guy. And so, like I said, it becomes very, very clear that Neil McDonough is essentially portraying the devil throughout this movie. And so, overall, pretty solid faith-based film. I really wish there was more talk about it, but overall, I thought it was pretty solid. I would put it, would I put it in the B+? I'd put it like bottom B+. I had a pretty good time with The Shift, with the multiverse concept and whatnot, and I enjoyed the message. There was some big standout scenes in the movie, especially that restaurant scene. Very, very, very well done, well executed, and I wish that they would have expanded more on it later on in the film. But overall, I like The Shift. I wish there was more talk about it. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely go check it out, even if you're not like Christian or anything like that. I think it's a pretty solid sci-fi, and you might enjoy some of the more underrated actors in here that I'm familiar with. Next up, we have Wonka, and if you watched my biggest surprises and disappointments video, this was on the surprises list, just because I had maybe a bit of a foolish doubt over this film that I just didn't really want another Wonka film, to be honest. Like, when I saw the trailer, sure, it looked pretty charming, but I was just like, I don't know, I don't really need for this, and it's not even like the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory story. It's kind of a backstory of Wonka himself and how he rose to prominence, I suppose you want to say. And I ended up really liking it. I really like how they just kind of focus on making a charming, uplifting, energetic, musical, basically. They really focus on the good parts that I like about the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory story, and not so much on those, like, darker elements that, especially the Tim Burton one, but even you see it a lot in the 1971 as well, which I very much understand that that is a big part of the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book. In a lot of Roald Dahl's books, he has kind of these darker underlying themes to it, but I just like how Wonka is just focused on being a family-friendly, charming, uplifting musical overall. And I really enjoyed the story as well. I thought it was really nice how Wonka, you know, he's trying to set up this new factory in this market square and ends up getting put into with these people who are in poverty, basically, in this whole market square area, and who are trying to work their way out of debt. And so he tries to help all these people, including an orphan called Noodle in this movie, and by selling his chocolate throughout the town. But the major rival companies like Slugsworth are trying to shut his business down. Even though they admit to liking his chocolate throughout this movie, they, like, secretly take some of his chocolate and they'll, like, eat it at some points in this film, even though they're like, well, we can't allow his business to continue or whatever. So I really liked Wonka. I really did enjoy it a lot more than I thought I was going to, and so I would throw it up in the B+ tier. I'd put it at the bottom of the B+. There was a lot of other kids' movies this year that I enjoyed a lot more, but overall, Wonka, not too bad. Definitely surprised me and had a lot more purpose to it than I initially thought. Like I said, just wasn't really in for another Willy Wonka film. That makes it sound like there's been a lot coming out the past few years, but I was just like, I don't really need a new Wonka film, but turns out it actually wasn't too bad, and had some purpose to it. Next up, we have Migration, which is a cute little Illumination kids film that came out this year, but ended up being pretty forgettable for me, I would say. I'm definitely not going to remember a whole lot about this movie. I already don't really remember a whole lot about this movie, even after, like, a week after watching it. And it's okay. I think even if I was a kid, like, and watching this movie, like, being the target audience or whatever, I still wouldn't really find this movie that appealing. And so, unfortunately, Migration goes, like, bottom C for me. Just a very, very forgettable film, unfortunately. Like, it's a cute little concept. Like, okay, these two kids really want to go on a trip to Jamaica, and so they beg their dad to take them to migrate with this other bird family that says they're going there, and talks about all this great, like, all this cool stuff that goes down there. And so it's a cute little road trip adventure, essentially, with birds. And I don't know, it's okay. Like, not really much to say here. Not a whole lot that stands out about this film, and that should tell you everything you need to know. Next up, we have Aquaman 2, and this is our last DCEU film of the year and of ever, because DCEU is done. And I would say, honestly, even though, like, the movies financially might have done so well this year, oh my god, the movies themselves, not too terrible. I had a pretty solid time with all of the DCEU films that I watched this year, including Aquaman 2. I like Jason Momoa. I liked him in Fast X, and he's kind of just able to be the same kooky character in here as well. And so I really like how he's just able to just have fun and just kind of be himself in this movie. I don't know if Jason Momoa actually acts like this in real life, but I would imagine, I would like to imagine that he does. But Aquaman 2, I'd put it like in the B tier. I'd put it maybe above Ant-Man, Quantumania. I had a fun time with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Obviously, I don't really need to dive into the story. It's not going to matter anyway because they're not making any more DCEU films, but it did its job for an Aquaman movie. I enjoyed Jason Momoa in here, and not much more to say. Next up, we have the Iron Claw, possibly the biggest surprise of the year for me. And what just an incredible film overall. I went into this just like this was going to be just another film, like, okay, it's about wrestling, it's got Zac Efron in it, I need to reach my 50 goal desperately, so I'm going to watch this movie anyway. And it turned out to be one of the most emotionally impactful, gut-punching, and devastating movies that I have ever watched. And just such incredible. All the performances in here, very, very great. Some Oscar-worthy performances in here. I at least hope that this movie is in the conversation for some Oscar nominations, because obviously it's going to be heavily overshadowed by a lot of other movies, but it needs to be in the conversation there because there are some really, really great performances in here. I think Zac Efron proves why he is more than just that High School Musical popular kid that we remember him for. He is able to really just put himself into an entirely different character's shoes here, where you don't watch this movie and you're like, hey, that's Zac Efron. You watch this movie and you're like, hey, that's Kevin Von Erich, and you understand the amount of devastation that he goes throughout this film, despite being fairly quiet and keeping his emotions in a whole lot throughout this movie. But you can just feel through how he looks throughout this movie, like his internal struggles and whatnot. And I've already went into this movie in depth in my full review, so I don't really feel I need to talk a whole lot about it. I think that out of all of the biopics, historical dramas, whatever you want to call them, throughout this year, this one I feel like had the most purposeful love story, where it was kind of our only, like, it was kind of ours and also our main character's escape from all of the devastation going on in his life, where he's obviously focused on his wrestling career. It matters a whole lot, not just to him, but also to his father in this movie, Fritz von Erich, who, as I've already mentioned, did an incredible job in this movie, the actor. And so, like, his only escape from that, his wrestling career, where all this devastation and tragedy has happened, is going back to his wife and kids throughout this movie and just being a father, basically. And that's kind of where he finds peace at the ending of the film. And so I thought that was just so incredible. One of the most emotionally impactful films I've ever seen. And so I would go as far to put this in the S tier. Honestly, my number one film of the year for sure. Now going back over it, not to discredit the other two films up in this tier, it's very, very tight, I will tell you. But I think that just the amount of surprise that this movie brought to me and the amount of impact that it left on me definitely makes it deserving of the number one spot. Because Oppenheimer, like, hey, it's a Christopher Nolan film. He's a historically very, very great director. But with Iron Claw, I did not see any of the stuff coming that this movie brought to me, and so definitely deserving of the number one spot for me. And unfortunately, these last two historical dramas, not as great as our predecessor here, but still not too terrible. We have The Boys in the Boat, which unfortunately I was one of the more bigger disappointments of the year. I was more excited for this movie than I was the Iron Claw going into it. And it was the exact opposite of the Iron Claw. Like, at best, a decent sports drama, but there are just so many underdeveloped characters in here. I don't care for the love story at all, and doesn't really leave me, like, the movie, like, crying or whatever, like, that was really, really good or whatever. Like, it was okay. Like, I've seen much better sports dramas, clearly, because we have the Iron Claw on here, but not too terrible, I would say. Like, there's just so much that it could have explored with the time period going on at the time, like with like the Great Depression, because this movie takes place during the 1930s, and it only like throws in hints of that throughout this movie, unfortunately. So, and even like the final like racing, like Olympic race that they do at the ending of the movie just kind of seems a little bit anticlimactic. Like, that's it, really? So I don't know. The Boys in the Boat, unfortunately, one of the bigger disappointments of the year. I just feel there's so many different areas that they could have explored so much better in here, with our head coach, with all of the different rowing members on here and everything like that. And it just, this movie barely just scratches the surface on like how much it could have explored. And I feel like even some of the other like characters on here, particularly the other members of the rowing team, were a lot more interesting than our main character himself. It kind of, oddly enough, it felt like our main character was really a side character in this movie. It almost felt like, which is very, very strange. But there's a few cool scenes in here that I did like, but overall, The Boys in the Boat definitely did not leave as big of an impact on me as The Iron Claw did. And so I'd put The Boys in the Boat, where would I put it? I'd put it like bottom B. Not terrible, but not as great as it could have been. Finally, we have Ferrari, the movie where Adam Driver plays the founder of the popular luxury car company, and we get a bit of a backstory of him in here. I know I tried to make that sound interesting, but yeah, I'm not too enthusiastic about this film. I found it to be quite boring, and it didn't sound boring going into it. Like, I think that it wouldn't have been boring had they explored some of the things that I really wish they would have in here, where I said the same thing about this with The Boys in the Boat, and, well, not so much Napoleon, but mainly The Boys in the Boat, where I feel like they could have explored the time period a little bit more, especially with car companies at the time. Like, the 1950s and 60s, like, a huge period for cars, like, obviously, cars still very much in the development stage, where, like, like, owning a car was a very, very big deal. It was, like, you owned a car, like, it was very, very cool to have one at the time. And so I wish there was, like, more they could have explored with, like, the rival companies to Ferrari, and how it impacted the company and that kind of stuff. But they try to focus on the character of Ferrari, and unlike many of our other prominent figures like Napoleon and Oppenheimer, he's just not as interesting as the company itself. So I really wish, instead of trying to make a biopic, they would have just focused on the car company itself, and, you know, maybe played in a little bit to the actual founder, but mainly focusing on the car company. So I wish this was Ferrari the company and not Ferrari the person. So that's kind of that's basically my general consensus of this movie. There's a few cool scenes in here. There's some really, really tragic scenes in here that were like completely threw me off guard when I watched them. And also there's a few scenes in here where, like, I'm normally not a person to point this out or like catch on, like, or spot this very, very easily, but there were a few scenes in here where I was like, those visuals do not look great. Like, those look noticeably bad. And so yeah, there was a few scenes like that, and if you hear me saying that, then you know that it was probably pretty bad. So Ferrari, unfortunately, not too interesting. I would put this like above The Boys in the Boat, honestly, B tier. Not too bad. Adam Driver does an okay job. There's a few funny bits in here as well that I'm not sure if they were intentional or not, but yeah, that is going to be pretty much it for that movie. And that is going to wrap up this tier list. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Rank all the movies you watched in this year. Let me know your top 5, whatever it may be. Maybe there was some on here that you disagreed with. Maybe there obviously a ton of movies on here that I missed, so let me know what you thought about those movies as well. And yeah, I can finally shut up about 2023 movies and officially move on to 2024 movies, which not a terrible year for movies. A lot of big surprises in here, a lot of movies that you weren't expecting to be as good as they were, that made it to the top of this ranking, and a lot of movies that should have been better that were at the bottom half of this ranking. So, interesting year for movies as far as the box office goes, as far as the quality of movies go. This will be a huge lesson learner for many big movie companies, as I've already said with a few of my previous videos. So, yeah, like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. That's going to be a wrap. It's time for me to edit this video and get it out. So yeah, stay tuned for future movie reviews. We're going to be moving on from 2023 movies and officially going into 2024 movies, which I'm actually, by the time this video will be uploaded, I would already have had my Night Swim quick review out. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you go check that out. I made a quick review for it. I didn't feel the need to make a full review. So that's pretty much it. We've already tapped into one movie for 2024. So yeah, make sure you check that out. And that's going to be it. I'll shut up. I will leave it at that. And that's it. Like and subscribe, guys. And I will see you next time.